All right. Well, we're still discussing trade. I have right here in the studio, well, someone from the private sector, not from the customs, obviously, even though you have a color close to them. Well, we have Chimenem Nwoka. Chimenem Nwoka is a co-founder and chief executive officer of Freeze Africa. You are into digital trade and all of that. Now, we hear customs there. They are talking about trade. We see what's happening globally. We hear President Donald Trump every day. The customs here, they're trying to give businesses the assurance that there can be less control, more transparency in the system. For you, with all the news going on and the tariff and trade war and all of that, are there opportunities for Nigerian businesses?
Definitely. I think there are lots of opportunities with everything happening in America. So Trump has added what I call entropy to the system, things like tariffs and trying to create what he sees as a stronger future for America. I think we as Africans and Nigerians have to do the same and take advantage of the opportunities that are left by these challenges. So I think the first round of tariffs came up with energy imports and exports between Canada, United States, and China. And I think China is about the largest
importer. Yes, there.
Yeah. And then Nigeria has a lot of coal. These are just like some low-hanging fruits that you can take.
Nigeria has a lot of crude, but we haven't even serviced our domestic needs, so that leaves us hanging right there.
It leaves us hanging, but then, aside from crude, we have coal, we have other things that are needed, but it doesn't have to just be energy. Higher tariffs means that more countries are going to be looking at diversifying their input sources. So if they're importing primarily from the United States or the global north, they're going to be looking other places that might even be cheaper even for them to work with. Aside that, there's probably the call for less trade with the dollar. And if Trump continues with his policy on tariffs and this trade war, there's probably going to be more calls for that. So you're already seeing the BRICS nations trying to create a chart of working with their own currencies for trade. You already have the European Union, which is already a big bloc for trade. And Africa, we have AFCFTA, we have PAPS coming up. So I'm sure they're going to be more, aside looking at diversifying their input sources, but trying to encourage more trade in other currencies apart from the dollar. And then Nigeria can take advantage of this. I think we already have an agreement with China for the Chinese yuan and renminbi swap agreement, and then try and diversify who we trade with other than America, as well as strengthening our trade with America as well.
Yeah, because I was having a conversation yesterday and someone was saying the farms seem to be emptying out in America. So who knows, by the time they send away all the migrants who work on the farms, then they might have to be importing food. That's if, we can meet up to that, because having the product is one thing, but having it developed to a level of exports in meeting the standards is another thing.
True, that's true. We have so many, I wouldn't say problems, but we have so many areas for improvement that we can go with. But then first, with an increase in demand or potential increase in demand for Nigerian-made and African products, is going to result in more investment in that sector to take our products to at least global standard and at least allow us to be more competitive.
So when we talk about digital trade regulations across boards, who do you see as immediate potential partners for collaboration for Nigeria, with Nigeria, about maybe from the government and then the private sector?
I would say the government and the private sector. To be fair, it involves everybody. Everybody has a role to play. The SMEs, the large manufacturing companies, and even the consumers all have a role to play in us having a digital future when it comes to trade. But then I'll start with the government. There's the MLETR, what we call the Model Law on Electronic Trade Records, that's being adopted by about 100 countries, which Nigeria is a part of, but hasn't been implemented yet. Only been implemented by a few countries, Singapore, Bahrain, Abu Dhabi, and then England in 2023. I think that having the government to implement such a law would make it easier. I think the customs people were talking about monitoring transactions or monitoring trade of documents, allows them to do that, but allows for more auditability and trust for trade transactions in Africa, and even allowing access to financing, making financing easier. So I think that's probably the foundation layer the government has to do with. But then aside that is private sector, and I'm including banks in the private sector, have to be intentional about digitizing. So be intentional about putting data on certain systems and being able to share this data as opposed to being manual with paper, which is very restrictive. Aside it being restrictive, it allows so much opportunity for fraud and other risks that come into the trade process.
And I'm glad you mentioned the banks and you mentioned PAPs earlier, because payment system is also a challenge in all of this. Even trading, you talked about AFTA, within Africa seems to be a challenge, mostly because of payment system.
Exactly. I think Africa has to, talking about like the taking advantage of the whole global trade war. Africa has to first be able to trade with itself first before it's really thinking outward. And PAPS is PAPS and AFCFTA are very good initiatives being put up, and then it will help in reducing the cost. So I think estimates have it about between 5 to 6% of the cost of sending payments for remittance based, and then for business payments about 2 to 3%. Having us trade in local African currencies and align that movement of money between different African countries would make it easier for trade to go, make it easier to meet the goals of the FCFTA.
Well, we hope that these things will work and go beyond papers and words, Well, thank you so much, Tumene Mwoka, co-founder and chief executive officer of Breeze Africa.
Thank you so much.